This is On the Line, and I'm Eric Felton. One issue that has been locked in political limbo for decades is immigration. Should the U.S. open its doors wider to new immigrants? And how should the U.S. treat the millions of immigrants not legally living in the country? I sat down recently with Los Angeles Times correspondent Brian Bennett, who's been covering immigration politics, and asked him if there's a chance of bipartisan immigration reform.
Well, looking at the landscape right now, I'd say there hasn't been a better chance in recent years for both parties to come together in Congress and come up with some new solutions for our immigration system here. That said, the atmosphere in Congress is so poisoned by the debates over fiscal negotiations, so-called fiscal cliff, that are going to be lingering on into the next year. And also the Republicans still control the House, so any immigration legislation is still going to have to get through the House, which would be difficult, and would require a decision by the House leadership to let it come to a vote, even if they don't have all of the majority of the support of the House Republicans. So, I think the answer is there hasn't been a moment in the last 5 or 6 years where it was as possible as it is now that immigration reform could pass in Congress, but it doesn't seem, there are still very high hurdles to getting that done.
Now, you have not only ongoing fiscal issues, debt spending, but then you also have, in the wake of the gun attack on the school in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, you're having a push for gun control that is likely to be a very contentious issue. Are these things sort of eating up the political oxygen, if you will, that makes it possible for any kind of deal to get done?
So this is a big concern that some of the immigration advocates have, which is that a month ago, before the shootings in Connecticut, the White House was very clear that as soon as they were done with negotiations over the fiscal cliff, they were going to turn all of their attention and energy to the immigration debate. Now, after the shootings in Sandy Hook, the White House said, well, we're also going to put together a task force led by Vice President Joe Biden. We're going to come up with some recommendations on ways that we could change the gun laws. So suddenly the landscape is looking very crowded. The agenda for the White House is looking very crowded next year, and it's not quite as clear how they can muster all of their resources and energies on just one topic and one push like immigration.
Now, the president has been taking action on the immigration question through executive orders. How does that work different from the normal legislative process?
So in the course of the way the government issues visas or gives out residency permits, there's a certain amount of rulemaking that the government can make without congressional action.
This is the executive departments and agencies that are under the president's control are in charge of making those kinds of rules.
That's right. And so there's a certain amount of leeway that the president, through his executive authority, can have in how the immigration laws are put into effect. That's a controversial position. Not everyone in Congress, for example, agrees that the president has that amount of control on immigration law, but President Obama has decided, hey, we're going to try to do as much as we can to take some of the most sympathetic cases in the immigration system and give them some relief. So, for example, over the summer he created a program where young people who were brought to the country unlawfully as children could apply for essentially a 2-year promise from the administration that they wouldn't be deported, and they would get a work permit. So that program was done through executive action, and over 400,000 people have applied so far to that program. Then just recently, the administration decided to make another small tweak, which would allow people who are in the country illegally to basically, if they have very close family members, it would make it easier for them to apply to make their status legal. And that went through without a congressional action. So there are some of these small things, but for big fixes, there's a limit to what the president can do without going to Congress, and he's made it clear that he really wants Congress to take action and put a bill on its desk this year that addresses the totality of the 11 million people who are here in the country illegally and creates a way for them to get their status worked out.
Now, the executive action that the president took last year was seen as being very beneficial in shoring up, building up support among Latino voters in the U.S. In the presidential election. At this point, the Democratic Party has such an advantage with Latino voters. Does that complicate the ability of getting some kind of deal done, in that it may be to the Democratic Party advantage not to sort of let the Republicans get in on solving the problem?
So this is sort of the debate here, is that some strategists feel like, well, the Democrats really don't have a real reason to make this issue go away and to solve the problem, because they can use immigration as a bludgeon against the Republicans in future elections. Then on the other side of that, there are Republican strategists who are saying, hey, we really need to come to the table and accomplish some of these things and try to accomplish things that, frankly, the Democrats haven't been able to accomplish and get through Congress. And then that will sort of take this issue off the table, and we can appeal to Latino voters on core issues that conservatives care about: business interests, creating jobs, the economy, things like that. So there's this. We're going to have to see how this plays out, and I think there's a real feeling that right now we've hit a moment where there is some Republican political initiative to try to get something done on immigration.
Republicans having looked at the last election and saying, it's not helpful to their party to be the anti-immigrant party. It could be kind of painted into that corner.
Yeah, the exit polling coming out of the presidential election showed over 70% of Latino voters voted for Obama. And I think parsing out exactly why they voted that way is not always straightforward. Some strategists would say, well, they were really focused on the Obama's promises about the tax code, not necessarily immigration. But it is interesting to see whether or not the Republicans are going to say, okay, we've learned a lesson from the exit polling in the last elections. We really need to come to the table and be honest brokers on the immigration issue, and that way we can reach out to Latino voters for future elections.
Now, so much of the immigration debate in the U.S. is focused around immigrants from Latin America, whether Mexico or South America, Central America, and yet what happens with immigration politics affects people trying to come to the U.S. from all over the world. How is the debate and the way it's playing out in this sort of Latin American context affecting the immigration prospects for people elsewhere in the world?
Well, so one of the big sticking points on the immigration debate is what our visa levels would be going forward. So how many workplace visas, for example, high-tech visas the U.S. should allow every year. And this issue has been tied up with all the other immigration issues as well. And there have been efforts in the past. Last year, for example, there were efforts to increase the number of high-skilled technology visas. But the way that was packaged by Republicans in the House, it meant eliminating the diversity visa lottery, which would have shut down a lot of the visas that were going to people applying from Eastern Europe and Africa, for example. So this issue affects a lot of different parts of the globe and people who want to come to the United States. And we're going to have to see, some of the Republicans are saying, hey, let's just try to tackle one small piece at a time. And some of the Democrats are saying, no, we need to package it all together so that we can get it all done and get enough people on board.
Brian Bennett of the Los Angeles Times, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, happy to be here.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you'll join us again next week for On the Line.